Yeah, you guys are established enough. You can do whatever the fuck you want.
You heard it here first, folks. Those are the first words of this latest episode of the Heavy Hands podcast. We have Ben Kohn of the Fight Site here, and boy, are we excited because Phil, I don't know if anyone who listens to the show regularly has figured this out. We hide it pretty well, but we are not what you might call grappling experts. Now I know, again, we've obfuscated that, where we sound really, really intelligent whenever we talk about grappling. We went into such tremendous depth about the positional battle that might play out between, say, Damian Maia and Gilbert Burns last week. But we thought we would bring in like a real jiu-jitsu ace to keep us even that little bit more, informed about what played out at UFC Brasilia, because it was weird. There was no audience. It was a very strange experience. I'll just say it up front, too. We have no fucking idea what is happening next week. Heavy Hands will continue. I might even try to put out some extra bonus material because it's looking like a lot of people who listen to this show are going to be stuck inside for a while. So we might try to put out extra stuff to help you guys through that, help you guys through the lull. But I think we're mostly going to be focusing on last week's card on this episode. And so, Ben, thank you for joining us. Please give me a quick rundown of why you actually personally asked to be on this particular episode.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me.
Of course.
Thank you for calling me a jiu-jitsu ace when my main achievement is getting my ACL torn by Devontae Johnson.
That's ace is short for jiu-jitsu ACL-less. That was really great.
The reason why I asked to come on is because when I was watching Charles Oliveira versus Kevin Lee, I may or may not have been about as excited as when I got married or had my two children.
Yeah.
So I in the heat of the moment, absolutely demanded to be on this episode, and they graciously allowed it.
Did we tell him that we were going to have him on anyway? Or are we keeping that a secret?
Oh.
Who's that? What?
We already said that we were gonna try and get a hold of Ben to have him come on the show.
Ben. It was between you and
maybe we should.
It was between you and having Tom Elliott back on to talk grapples.
To be fair, he's better at jiu-jitsu than me by a wide margin.
Yeah, but he sounds so much like Pat that it's like only so much I can take.
Weird. It was so weird. I really thought he was Pat for a second. I'm like, what is this?
Yeah, and I was kind of afraid, honestly, that if we brought him back on, I would start screaming at him about Jan Blachowicz and how good he is. So,
still one of my favorite episodes, by the way.
So I'm glad we got you back, or got you on for the first time, rather, instead of Tom. Fuck you, Tom. I hope you're
Jesus.
I hope you're safe and indoors.
This is aggressive.
We're already going stir crazy here on this week's episode. Okay, so let me give everyone the quick rundown. Here's a couple of things we're going to talk about, right? This was a great card for grappling sequences. There was a lot of really fun, scrambly, tactical ground battles last Saturday night. The main event, Charles Oliveira, Kevin Lee. Not only did we get to see Charles Oliveira's improved striking, also just the sheer confidence he has in it now, which allows him to walk through clean shots from Kevin Lee. His defense maybe hasn't gotten better, but he doesn't care anymore. And that makes Charles Oliveira a very scary man, both on the feet and on the ground. Of course, we're going to hit that first. Gilbert Burns didn't have much time to grapple with Damian Maia before he knocked him out, but it was certainly key to the way that fight played out. Nikita Krylov used the greatest jiu-jitsu game in the light heavyweight division to defeat Johnny Walker. We're definitely going to talk about that. And Brandon Moreno, he almost did what Joe Benavidez did in terms of scrambling out of terrible positions against Jussier Formiga. And please don't let me forget Enrique Barzola versus Hani Yahya. That fight was non-stop scrambling madness. It was a grappling fan's dream, this card. It was one of the best grappling cards, I think, I've seen in a while. So we're going to try and hit all of that, take real advantage of having our resident jiu-jitsu ace today. So Ben, why don't you maybe give me the kickoff for Charles Oliveira versus Kevin Lee?
Well, before that, I do want to say if we have time, I definitely want to discuss Marcos versus Amanda Ribas.
Oh yes,
we'll talk about. That fight had a lot of interesting things to talk about, but Charles Oliveira. This is exact. Oh, this went almost exactly as I kind of scouted it, which made me really happy as well. Minus the finish, I thought it would be much quicker. I thought it'd be the first round or maybe early second. But really what allowed, like you said, what we've seen in his now 7-fight run, I think, with 7 finishes, it's been something that I cannot – it's kind of one of these things that his striking, the strides he's made in his striking and mental game have allowed his jiu-jitsu game to really flourish. And – it's important to note that what we saw in the grappling exchanges, though, was one, Kevin Lee is actually a really good grappler in his own right. What we really saw, though, was that Charles broke him mentally, both on the feet and on the ground. Because by the end of round 1, Kevin Lee was in Oliveira's guard and doing what Paul Felder was doing. Yeah. Landing elbows, and Charles didn't break there.
He didn't get there by the same route or spend as much time there, but it was looking like the turn that he would have needed to win that fight.
Absolutely. The problem was that what I think that Charles did incredibly well is that it wasn't just that he was doing positional grappling, and his positional grappling was excellent. You saw him get some really good near sweeps, some leg lock attempts, obviously the triangle attempts, armbar. He went for everything you possibly could. Omoplata. But when he was going for them, there was sense to it. It wasn't like a senseless throw up of a triangle and hope to God you finish him. Everything that he did was chained together almost perfectly. And also one thing that I love about Charles Oliveira's game is it looks beautiful.
Yes.
It really does. Everything has almost like a smoothness to it.
Yeah. It was so calm, the way everything flow. It was but like slow, you know what I mean? Like it was not rushed.
It really does.
It was so methodical, and yet it was in there against a live resisting opponent. It almost looked like a demonstration at a lot of different points.
Exactly. That's actually one of the ways I would describe it. It looked like a real live flow roll. Is how I would put it. His attacks against Kevin Lee's legs constantly forced him to defend, obviously, but they weren't like the nonsensical heel hooks, the nonsensical attacks at the ankles or knees. They made sense. They forced Kevin Lee to focus on balance and maintaining position, as opposed to being able to do what a lot of people do when they go for get done to them when they go for heel hooks, which is just get punched in the face a lot. And Kevin Lee did an excellent job of, again, defending these attacks. Constantly was able to reestablish positions. The problem is that in these positions, you can kind of see there were times where Kevin Lee would, quote unquote, use his physical advantages to maintain those spots. And when you have a guy who's missed weight and then made it on the second attempt 2 hours later, it's not even like he stopped cutting weight, has a mental game issue of his own, you can't keep relying on those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Physical strength, that kind of stuff. In the Barzola fight, we see where that kind of stuff pays off.
Sure.
But when you're gonna fade, you can't rely on that. And unfortunately, we saw that Kevin Lee had to rely on it in a big way, and it wasn't going to be there for him all night. It was only going to be there for him in the first, maybe second round.
This wasn't a purely a grappling sequence. It strayed into the realm of wrestling. I guess those lines are rather blurry sometimes. But the takedown that preceded. No, it wasn't the one preceding the guillotine. It was at the end of round 2, I think.
Yes.
Oliveira sort of got taken down. He clapped on a whizzer. He was working back to his feet. You know, he got some space between his hips and Lee's hips, and he dug an underhook, and Lee just powered through to clamp down on a body lock and throw Charles down. And there was such a stark difference in that one moment between how much effort each guy was putting into it. Like Oliveira, he did everything technically in order, not rushed, and then he got taken down anyway. And he was clearly not distressed about it. He realized he was going down and was already considering what he was going to do now that he was back on his back. Whereas Lee was fighting all of these technical steps the whole way, just basically like the entire time thinking, I have to clasp my hands together and squeeze like the Dickens so I can put this guy back on the ground. I have to get him back down. I have to be on top. It was, yeah, there was such a contrast in confidence and composure of these two fighters, both on the feet and the ground. Phil?
I will say something that it is a little hard to tell with Charles Oliveira, like what is composure and what is him deciding to or him just deciding to give up. He's a little like Frank Mir in his response to things going wrong, in that it'll just be kind of like, oh, this is okay. Oh, this is okay. And then he will instantly switch gears to just being like, oh no, done with this now. And he'll just, you can see it happen in fights, but like the change in who he is not necessarily like that visible. So like I think he kind of looks composed, but I think it's because he has a very like defined idea of what he considers like a fight to be, and that's something that's expanded over time. So one thing I wanted to ask is like, what about the submission right at the end? Because it was I think it was a takedown we'd seen from Lee before, in that he'd clearly had at least a trigger to a left body kick that he was going to shoot a double leg. It was a super ugly double leg, which does lead me to think that, like, as many people have said on Twitter, that he might have just been hurt by the kick itself, because he shot it and it was clearly not like going to happen in any real way. Like this wasn't going to be, if he was going to get this, it was going to be by hulking it. Yeah. It wasn't like the first takedown that he got like that it was very smooth. It was done instantly. Lee had no chance to pick up the guillotine. This one, he kind of fumbled his way through it. But when they hit the mat, he was still in half guard. And then he got tapped anyway, and tapped in a way which kind of implies that he also got, it wasn't like, this wasn't him giving up. This was him getting choked unconscious.
Oh yeah.
Unless something, it's very difficult to tell what's going on in a fighter's head. We've mentioned before, there's been multiple instances of fighters who just don't know what's happened after the fight, even when they've won. But like, yeah, so from half guard, is that just Chucky Olive squeeze, or? So
now, Phil, I'm the grappling. Oh, I'm sorry, Ben. Were you gonna?
No, grappling expert. Go.
Yeah. Well, he was on the wrong side of half guard.
That is correct.
He was on the squeeze side.
Correct.
So it was tighter, actually, probably on that side than it may have even been in full guard, unless Chucky Olive had adjusted the angle. But
well, that particular, just from what I saw of the actual lock of yes, he went to the wrong side, which literally just does nothing. It makes it worse.
Yeah.
If anything, even if you lift your hips up, it does nothing to relieve the pressure. The other problem was that Oliveira, the way it looked, the blade was actually in the front of the neck also. So in addition, and he was also squeezing against his body. So it looked like he had a carotid and a pain like on the front of the throat, just from what I could see. I'm not going to say 100%, but that was a really tight squeeze.
I mean, there's almost certainly some element of that's Charles Oliveira's move. Like,
yeah.
For a guy who's great at everything, the guillotine is still like the front headlock series, but the guillotine in particular is his move. And when we see grapplers have like their specialty, like one sign of that, of how strong they are with it, is how much more quickly they put people out with it than other people would. Like Damian Maia gets a rear naked choke with one arm, and people start to go dizzy in seconds.
Absolutely.
I remember when Jacare got an arm triangle on, I think it was on Chris Camozzi, and he tapped in like half a second.
Yeah. Well, no, he went out. No.
Maybe you're right. Yeah, but it was so quick. Yeah, it was so quick. It's like, okay,
which Chris Camozzi submission was this?
One of the 18 times he fought Jacare.
I think it was in their 15th fight that he got him with the arm triangle. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, Ben, please.
A couple things I wanted to point out. Look at the difference between the Charles Oliveira attempt to work a clinch takedown on Kevin Lee in the round one, and compare that to Kevin Lee versus Kevin Lee's attempt at the clinch takedown in round two.
Mm-hmm.
The Charles Oliveira really timed that very well. He didn't get the takedown, but it was well timed. It made sense, and he ended up, I think, pulling guard. Another thing is that when Kevin Lee got that Hulk smash takedown, I think that was Kevin Lee's moment to win, and he was also broken, I think, at that point. I think they both were a little bit, oh shit, I'm done. Because Oliveira motioned with his hand the second after he got slammed and kind of just lay there the rest of the round, while Kevin Lee lay on top of him the rest of the round.
Yeah, that was the other thing I was thinking, is that, like, if that guillotine hadn't worked, do I really trust Charles Oliveira that he would have survived on the bottom, because his bottom game was getting more worryingly inert as time went by.
I do not think that it would have been an issue necessarily, because I think he also realized that he broke Kevin.
I'm not sure if Charles Oliveira works like that.
You might be right. You might be right. I do think that Kevin was really done at that point, though, especially after that body kick. Because even if he escaped, which he wasn't, like, you could tell, like, Kevin, I think he was hurt, because the second he went down, he in the first round, you compare how he worked, where he was doing everything correctly when defending those submissions. For Kevin Lee to just immediately work to go to the left side, which was the side of the guillotine, he had to have been hurt and not thinking. He had to have been, because he's way too experienced of a grappler to think that's a good idea.
Yeah, he was also gassed. Like, he was gasping by the start of the second round. You know, like. Yeah, it's Charles Oliveira, so who the fuck knows? Like, how far can you really trust him? But I tend to agree with you, Ben. I think, you know, like, I still look at that David Tamer fight, and I'm like, all right, if Charles Oliveira ever feels good, it is when he feels that he has broken his opponent mentally. If he is ever resilient, it is when he feels like he can still bully the other guy. And it's when that option is, like, no longer available to him that he runs out of hope, basically, that he breaks. And I think he's gotten better at that. I don't know, like, he was so aggressive at the start of each round in this fight. Like, I think Charles Oliveira now knows, like, I fight my best when I'm just incredibly, I don't want to say aggressive again, but when he's a bully. He fights best when he just doesn't give the other guy breathing room. You were going to say, Ben?
Yeah. The one thing I actually wanted to talk about is, I know this is something I kind of noticed in the Giagios fight, is that he seems to have developed, like, some sort of, like, mental resets / tics similar to Poirier almost, when he gets hit hard or when he feels like he's losing control. So between that and the Tamer fight is part of the reason why I think his mental game has come along much further than I think most people would consider giving it, as opposed to just people, like, saying, whatever, you know, it's Charles Oliveira, as long as he's like you said, as long as he's bullying. I do think there's a little bit more work that's been done building him back up, and I think they've been giving him these mental tics, because against Jared Gordon, he was getting pushed back. I mean, and obviously it ended real fast, but there's that. I do think we'll see it tested, obviously, against guys who can kind of survive. Like, if he faces, I don't know if they'd do Paul Felder too, or
God forbid, Justin Gaethje or someone.
Okay, no, Justin Gaethje's going to end him, but you know, I don't want to see it, so keep them away, please.
What are those tics that you've noticed?
He would kind of just, like, it's similar to, you know, Dustin Poirier kind of, like, does, like, he'll wipe his hair to the side and kind of, like, do these big deep breaths.
Oliveira was definitely doing the no-sell with the brushing of the hair.
Correct.
The, like, Ben Henderson classic.
Things. Deep breaths where he would kind of, like, cock his head a little, similar to it. I don't know if they have any connection whatsoever to each other, but it would be cool if I found out, like, oh yeah, they talk and they've become friends and go to the same, sports psychologist.
That's an interesting thought. Yeah, but definitely I noticed that. I didn't even think of it as like a mental tic. I thought of it from the perspective of no selling the strike. Like, when he would get hit with something particularly clean, he would brush his hair to the side and be like, but I think you're right. Like, that probably does a lot to convince himself that he's fine.
Yep.
That he's just,
and
like,
guys like him need it.
Yeah. You're cool, is what he's saying to himself. Like, you're still the coolest motherfucker in this cage right now. Brush your hair to the side.
God, that fucking hair, though.
Coming with that old lady blue hair, yeah.
I don't know. He's
I don't know.
Literally an anime character.
I actually thought it looked surprisingly good on him, I'll be honest. I didn't hate it. All right.
I love Oliveira, but I didn't love
All right.
Connor, we talked about the strategy before the fight.
Yeah.
And we were like, Kevin Lee needs to push Charles Oliveira backwards.
Yeah.
And we don't think he will. And he didn't. What did you think?
Yeah, the thing is that Firas Zahabi actually asked him to. But it wouldn't be the first time I've seen Firas Zahabi ask one of his fighters to do something in the corner that it does not appear they were actually prepared to do in camp. So I suspect it was a bit of both. I think Lee is just, I don't know, like normally predisposed to allowing his opponent to dictate the fight, perhaps especially because he's worried about gassing and pushing too much of a pace on himself. Of course, we've seen him fight super aggressively in the past, but I think there's part of him that doesn't necessarily like doing that. That has to be specifically prepared to do that for the duration of his camp. And then there's another part of it that's
also.
I
think that also, Kevin Lee is also a bully in that way. I mean, that's the weird thing about this is that these are two very similar guys.
Yeah.
In they both got thrown into like marquee matchups super early in their career. Both incredibly talented, physical, gifted grapplers.
Caught between
really
divisions.
To put it together and caught between divisions. Kevin Lee should move up. He shouldn't let a fight against Rafael dos Anjos.
Oh no, I got tired before RDA did. Yeah, I mean, give it another shot, buddy.
Who the hell does it?
Right.
In my first fight at this weight class.
Yes.
But yeah, two pretty similar guys. And yeah, but I think, Lee, when moving forward, he responds to people moving backwards.
Yeah.
And even in the third round, where Kevin Lee really went for it, Charles Oliveira just stood there and traded with him. I mean, like you said, no defense, but didn't really matter.
There was some defense. I mean, he was aware. He saw pretty much everything that hit him coming. He wasn't surprised. But that's the thing is, this was interesting because I think I mentioned on last week's show that looking at his fight with Tamer, I was like, wow, Charles Oliveira's been a pretty good tall striker for a while. Got the uppercuts. He's got the knees. Of course, that leads right into his
kick.
Yeah, he's got that, and it leads right into his front headlock game, which is the tall fighter's clinch submission entry.
He also has an excellent reactive double.
He does.
He's really good at initiating clinch exchanges as well.
Yeah,
it's what makes him so effective is that it's not just he has things that flow into each other. Like his striking game is meant to back you up, and then he also is able to kind of initiate these pocket exchanges.
We saw a lot of that here. He would miss on the left hook. And convert that into a collar tie and land the uppercut, that little dirty boxing move. He's got a lot of tricks like that. He's always been a great tall striker. And I noted how in his fight with David Tamer, we really saw the blossoming of a long striking game. That his distance management was on point in that fight. He was never closer than he wanted to be. He just watched Tamer miss straight punches. He didn't have to move, and he knew it. He let those shots miss his nose by about an inch or two. And in this fight, it was interesting because, I think this speaks to the growing confidence of Charles Oliveira. He didn't try to fight long because he wanted to get in Kevin Lee's face. So I think he deliberately ignored a range where Lee's reach would have made him more competitive because he wanted to get in Lee's face and keep the pressure on him. And so, even though his defense may not have been perfect in the pocket, he reasoned, I suppose, that he was safer within Lee's wingspan than he was out on the end of it, and just tried to stay there as much as possible. At the start of round 2, when referee Mr. Mustache told him to start, he did fighter ready, and Kevin Lee was the second fighter to be asked if he was ready. And as he was looking over to make sure Kevin Lee was ready, Oliveira was already advancing. That was his modus operandi in this fight, was get in Kevin Lee's face, pressure him all the time. And yeah, it was obviously perfect. It was exactly what he needed to do. And like you sort of hinted at there, Phil, and like we said last week, it was exactly what Kevin Lee should have done to Charles Oliveira. But because Oliveira had his foot on the gas first and didn't let up, he didn't get the chance. He was constantly fighting Oliveira's fight. So I thought it was awesome. I mean, it was really entertaining. It was a great main event, as we expected it would be.
Yep.
Hopefully nobody caught the Rona from each other.
I really hope not. That would not be a good look for the UFC, and that's also dangerous for the fighters. So they constantly mess with their immune systems with the weight cutting. So I really hope nobody. Yeah, it's scary.
It is scary. It was dumb, and especially because if you're going to have an empty arena, put the ring on a beach. Put it in the Coliseum. You know, everyone wants to go to Italy right now to fight, right?
Jesus Christ.
But you know what I mean? Pick a different location. You don't even have to do the arena, you know? Everything,
I don't know.
Complete shit show. But the fights were great, and this was certainly among those great fights. Let's take a break. When we come back, we are going to try and get through the rest of this card, which is a fairly tall order. We considered doing a topic, but Ben, I'm enjoying talking about these grappling heavy matchups with you, so maybe we will just end up running through the order of the card here. But we'll be back to talk about Burns versus Maia, Moicano versus Hadzovic, Krylov versus Walker, and more after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are still here with Ben Kohn, and we're talking about all the grapples that happened on Saturday. I've forgotten how to host the show. And this is because I'm intimidated, because Ben, as you've mentioned to us between segments a couple times now, you have, I believe it was 4 pages of notes.
1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, exactly 4.
Sickening. I mean, this is really, like, I think you should be institutionalized. But before they come to take you away, I'm glad that you're here with us. Do you have notes? Are some of those notes pertaining to Gilbert Burns versus Damian Maia?
Yes.
I'll say
my
this.
handwriting is so bad that I might not be able to read it.
I'll say this. Phil and I last week, I think we gave this a pretty straightforward treatment. And one listener was a little upset. They thought there were more dynamics to this fight to break down. They wanted us to go into more depth, which is fine. We could always go into more depth on a matchup. But as it turned out, being able to either not get taken down or just being able to survive on the ground and then being a younger, stronger, better striker on the feet was all that mattered. So I think the pretty simple dynamic was actually very, very applicable to this fight. Is that how you saw it as well?
Yeah, and I think this goes into a broader topic of jiu-jitsu and MMA. Of if you're not big, strong, or good enough to control, this is just grappling in general, to control your opponent consistently, you need to be a really good submission threat, not just from positions of strength, but also snatch subs. And similarly to Charles Oliveira. Because otherwise you're just not going to get those positions to really win the fight, or you're going to gas out trying to control your opponent. Burns is a really high-level jiu-jitsu guy himself. Is he as high-level as Maia? No, he never reached those heights, and in a straight jiu-jitsu match, Maia would beat him most likely. But this isn't a straight jiu-jitsu match. There's a cage. There's punches. You can't Maia was never going to be able to, in my opinion at least, and this was my read, I did think he would last till the second round. I picked KO2, but I guess Maia is 42, so it's expected at this point that his chin's just not going to be able to hold up. But Yeah, there really wasn't much to do with regards to reading how those grappling exchanges would work. We know what Maia does. He gets you to the cage. He works to take your back, and then he tries to do his best back imitation for 3 rounds or until he chokes you. And that was never going to work against Gilbert Burns. He's too skilled at jiu-jitsu. He's too dynamic, and he understands these positions extremely well. One thing that's important to understand is that when someone's trying to take your back or control your back, you have to keep your hips pointed towards the ceiling. And the common counter to that was what Maia tried to do, transition to the mounts. Mm-hmm. And we saw Formiga do it against Moreno. The problem was that Burns, again, is himself a jiu-jitsu world champion.
He knew that move was coming.
Exactly. And he immediately pushed the leg over his head and slipped right out from the back door and was able to just get up and then knocked him out. So that's kind of the problem with control-oriented jiu-jitsu games. If you're not going to threaten, then whoever you're against is able to focus strictly on position and not have to worry about the submission. And we're going to see that theme in the Moreno-Formiga fight as well.
It's a very played out analogy, but at a certain level, jiu-jitsu it's chess. Everyone knows the book on certain positions. Like your opponent knows what the counter to this move is. There's no guesswork. This is how grappling works. This is the process. Yep. So if you're in Gilbert Burns' position, you don't maybe have to be as accomplished as Damian Maia. You just have to know, okay, if I fight this position in this way, he is going to go to the obvious next move. And as long as I'm ready for that, there's no way, even for Damian Maia, to not allow some slight positional opening as he transitions from one place to another. So all you have to do is wait for that position to open up for that split second. And it is really just like chess, where these guys could probably automatically go through those positions. Once again, sort of like a flow roll. Where each guy knows what's happening, except instead of them, doing it because they're allowing each other to have these openings, they're just both that knowledgeable about how the positions work.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think, because we've mentioned before that a lot of Maia's genius and success in the cage has been about paring down what works into them, like a very simplified set of approaches. He comes in behind the jab, he works on the single leg, and then he either turns the corner to the back or just continues attacking it. And that kind of it works not just because these are high percentage moves which work in a against a lot of people, because it's just a good fundamental set of tools, but because it works well to a environment like MMA, where you're going to be fighting people once. Mm-hmm. You're going to be fighting them You're going to be fighting them once, and you're going to be fighting them for maybe a few rounds. What you need is to be able to force through generally a fairly simplistic game plan as hard as you possibly can. And that in itself is going to mean that he didn't have many chances to get to Gilbert Burns. Yeah. And when he got to those chances, there were only the simple things that he could really go for. There was only the defined high percentage routes to go for. And he could have, tried to trick Burns and go for something else, presumably, but it's difficult. That would rely on him basically surviving for long enough.
Right. And unlike another matchup where he might be thinking, okay, I'm going to do a little bit of a gambit here. I'm going to go for my usual thing, expecting them to respond, and then throw in a surprise. Unlike other matchups where he might have tried that, he was facing another jiu-jitsu master. What are the chances of you going away from your A game and it really consistently working when, again, all Burns really has to do is stay safe on the ground and wait for that moment of space in transition to slip free, because once he's on the feet, it's his fight. He has all the real advantages. It was just a matchup I think that really, really favored Burns.
No, go ahead.
You go, Ben.
No, it's just that there has to be the feeling that a person's in danger in order for pretty much both on the feet and on the ground, there has to be that feeling of danger for your game plan to work. If Gilbert Burns does not feel like he's in danger, then Maia's grappling attacks are not going to work unless he's just that much better, which he wasn't.
Yeah. It's just, like chess, it's like he knows theory. That's it. He's just playing theory. There's no stress at all.
Yeah, and to be better, he needs more time to like leverage that than he really had. Because whenever even if he didn't get knocked out, he would have been getting chewed up. His Burns was already starting to just fearlessly go for leg kicks on him. Yeah. I did think that like it was also a bit of a book ending for Maia, because this was much like this was really a lot like his first knockout loss, which was when he's just kind of lazily pouring with a jab and he got immediately cross countered.
Yeah,
this time it was the left hook, but it's another example of kind of probability in action, because his game has always been about the high percentage stuff, and that jab is always like, it's never there to be a jab, but it goes to show there's like some significant tail risk involved in it. So like every now and again, just going to die for it.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to say that before, because Ben, you mentioned Maia's chin. I mean, I imagine he's 42. It probably is some kind of factor, but I'm not super confident. The first thing I thought of was, like Phil said, the Marquardt knockout. Again, it was, I think, Gilbert perfectly understanding the sort of larger game that the matchup presented. Because it's not like he dodged that jab. You know what I mean? It was like he had in his mind, Maia's going to hit me and I'm going to hit him back. And I'm going to come out on top if we have that game, if we play that game over and over. And he was right.
Seems to be Burns' thing.
Sure. Yeah. Which is okay. Like he used to get bullied and uncomfortable on the feet. And now he's better at counterpunching in a very like, Joe Benavidez kind of way, where it's like he's made the simple arithmetic in his head that if they can touch me, I can touch them. And that's better than just being the only one getting hit. But I don't know if it was a sign of Maia's, chin being gone, because the way that shot landed, there's a particular feeling you hear fighters talk about when they land a clean knockout shot, which is certainly why Burns raised his hands and thought he won. Where you throw a shot expecting to hit a wall, and then it feels like all you hit is paper. It just slaps right through. Like there's no resistance. That's a sign that you've just landed a shot that the other guy did not see coming. He was not prepared for. There was no resistance. And that's how it was. Like the follow through on that hook, the way it just sort of clipped cleanly through Maia's chin, he just didn't see it coming.
I don't think his chin is gone. I'm just saying he's 42. His chin can't be prime.
It can't be that strong. But it was also like, that's one of the most dangerous shots in boxing right there, is in a southpaw orthodox fight, in an open stance striking battle. The orthodox fighter's left hook or the southpaw's right hook, especially as a counter to the jab, that's the Manny Pacquiao special. That's Manila Ice.
Right.
It comes over the shoulder and you just don't see it. So I thought, great shot by Burns. He very clearly understood the dynamic of this matchup, and I think it was always going to be a pretty tough one for Maia because, like you said, Ben, he's just not that potent a finisher. So all Burns really had to do was just know the order of operations on the ground well enough to be safe, and then do shit on the feet. Okay, but let's.
I do wish it would have lasted longer, just so I could see more of those exchanges. But I got that Moreno Formiga. So
yes, we've got more coming up. So we got to move on. This is not a whole lot to say about this one because not a whole lot happened. It was 44 seconds long, according to Wikipedia. Renato Moicano made his lightweight debut against Damir Hadzovic. I tried to get Adel Berkic on Twitter to answer for his countryman's poor behavior. In the aftermath of this fight, but having just reviewed it, it was actually Moicano who, after submitting Hadzovic, started talking shit, apparently because he was mad that Hadzovic wasn't harder to beat. That's about as well as I can understand it. So Ben, once again, since this fight was so short and entirely decided by like one grappling exchange, what happened?
Don't do a technical stand-up if your opponent is in range. That's it. There's nothing else to talk about. Like, Renato Moicano is actually really a good submission artist and good black belt, and Hadzovic quite literally kicked him into the cage and bounced him back into him. Like, I don't know how else to say it. Like, it's just dumb.
It was like a pro wrestling setup. Yeah. Like he was intending to bounce him off the ropes.
Yeah, and Hadzovic bounced right into the back mount with a body triangle, and he has a really, really sick squeeze on that rear naked choke because that did not look like it was painless.
He was way too anxious to get up, basically.
Yeah, he got nervous being on his back with Moicano. He did not want to be there, and he got overzealous with getting up. And the whole point of the technical stand-up is that you kick away and you make sure there's enough space, and if there isn't, you go back down. And he just was like, nope, just gonna get up. And it was dumb.
That's pretty much it. Any other details? I don't know if there really were.
There's really not much. I mean, like, the way that so when Moicano actually got to the back, he did a really good job of getting around Hadzovic, because Hadzovic, I think he did have his arm out, but he just went around it, and I think Hadzovic just watched him do it. I don't know why he didn't even try to, like, he couldn't really turn into it, because once Moicano got to his side, it's just like, he can only go one way, and Moicano got him, immediately locked that body triangle with his weird long-ass legs, and that was it. He did a great job of pulling the chin up, too, to get that arm under. Because at first it was on the jaw, and then he was able to work his way under. Yeah. So there's not a ton of detail.
Couple of wrapping shots around the side always helps with that. I think he also, when Hadzovic was fighting the hands, he caught his own hand under his chin, which I thought was kind of a neat move. It's probably something that happens pretty commonly that I just don't normally am not normally keyed in on.
It's pretty. What's interesting is, like, what I do whenever. Again, this was really short, but I do enjoy the hand fighting battles for these rear naked chokes in MMA, just because you kind of see how much those gloves impact it. So I always do find it interesting when there are longer battles, but Hadzovic just wasn't good enough, and Moicano was really mad.
He was pissed about it.
It's just so great. It's one of the best parts of the card for me is Moicano yelling, "Be better!" Go take a jiu-jitsu class. I've never heard that before. That's my favorite part. I've never seen anything like that before.
I was genuinely baffled the whole time. I was like,
he went like full.
The guy was submitted.
He went full Skyrim orc. He went old orc. He was like demanding that they bring him the challenger who could finally kill him.
Oh my god.
All right. Well, speaking of, let's move on from people who weren't good enough and move on to people who were probably at a level of skill that none of us had ever imagined before this card. Speaking of course,
the real reason we got Ben on this.
That's right. This is why we brought in such a grappling expert.
I'm gonna retire early.
Eat Krylov versus Johnny Walker. Boy, it was everything I dreamed it could be in the first 2 minutes. And then after that, it continued to be all those same things for the remaining 13 minutes. It was like, I think as you said when we first started the call, Ben, it was like once you just saw Krylov hit that first takedown, it was like, okay, that's the fight.
Yep. No, that was it. It was Krylov hitting a takedown, and that was it. It was the rest of the fight was Krylov doing more of that with more very like blue belt grappling.
Love it. Another one, Phil, where I feel like our extremely bare bones, straightforward breakdown was actually exactly what this fight called for.
Hell yes.
It was like, hey,
when it comes to breaking down god awful fights.
Yes.
We're the podcast you come to.
That's right. Our breakdown was our prediction was essentially Krylov's going to win because A, he's extremely durable. He's never been properly knocked out. And all the people that Johnny Walker's knocked out, except for Justin Ledet, are kind of known for getting knocked out. And B, I believe we did not say he's good at wrestling, but rather simply he's going to do some of it. That was it.
Yeah.
He survived a Glover Teixeira arm triangle. You didn't need to analyze it more than that. Yeah. That's it.
and yet somehow couldn't survive the like no-gi Ezekiel that Jan Blachowicz caught him in. Very strange.
But yeah, like Krylov's whole like regional career prior to making it to the UFC was him just like head and arm throwing god awful regional heavyweights.
Yep. Doing dumb strongman submissions.
Into wacky submissions, yeah. So, like, he's always been a willing grappler, and you saw that against OSP last time as well. And I think this was genuinely kind of a smart fight from him.
Careful how you say that.
I mean, I don't know that he did anything that he wouldn't normally do. I think it was really just that the matchup favored him. Like,
I think he definitely had decided, I'm going to aggressively go for my wrestling. I mean, we saw, I think it was similar to what we saw from Ryan Wagner's boy, Jimmy Crute. And now I must see Crute Krylov.
Yes.
Must you?
Yeah.
All right. I just wanted to make sure that...
Do you realize what you're saying right now, Phil?
What?
No. I know you realize what you're saying. I know what a sick man you are. And like you, I also must see Krylov versus Crute. Is there really anything more to say here? Johnny Walker is super vulnerable to pressure. He just is not a very deep fighter. Remember that before he came to the UFC, before we really realized, I think, the extent to which he has power and the sort of reckless confidence to use it, like my expectation was like, oh, he's going to be bad. Like, he's not that good. He's less athletic than he thinks he is. He's way too hittable. And who was it that I saw beat him that I was like, oh yeah, this is the fight that's going to determine how his career plays out. I can't remember. Maybe it was the Wagner Prado fight. Yeah,
I forgot Wagner Prado until right now.
Yeah, it was just like a messy fighter went in there and took him down and pressured him. And that's about it. That's what you need to do. And that is what Krylov did. Ben, there was one exchange I recall you mentioning before where Walker actually did end up on top.
And then did not.
What would have had to go differently for Walker to turn this fight around, like in that position or in general?
Know how to grapple. Like, honestly, it's not like the biggest, like when I was a white belt, my biggest issue was when I would get to mount, because I would do the pendulum flower or whatever you want to call it sweep, and I would end up in mount and then consistently get rolled over. Mm-hmm. So honestly, this is gonna be mean, and I mean this in the most like endearing way. It's white belt shit. Like, you got to learn how to maintain positions. Like,
yeah.
Johnny Walker's athleticism is going to put him in spots that he's like, oh, look, and then like he'll have no idea how to actually do anything with it necessarily, at least in any sort of extended sequence. So you have to just know, like, okay, bring your hips down. Mm-hmm. Grapevine. He's got 90 feet of legs. Grapevine. Like, pull the guy's legs out. Use shoulder pressure to keep him down. If the guy tries to wrap up your arm, free it. Bring your weight to the other side so he can't just roll you over.
Yeah.
Make sure you have another arm. But like, these are basic things that he just would need to know, and he doesn't seem to. He's exactly the type of guy that just like walks into a gym and is so big, so athletic, so fast, and so strong that like it'll take like some decent purple belt for the most part to control him, unless he rolls with a similarly athletic person.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it sounds reductive. I guess in a way it is. But similarly, like in the past, I have said that about wrestling. Like, there's so much about MMA striking that I love to counter those sort of common like canards about how striking works in MMA. And there's so many things said about MMA striking for the entire history of the sport that are essentially like, oh, here are all the ways in which you have to compromise your striking in order to compensate for the threat of a takedown. And I get it. Like, it factors in. We saw Poirier-Khabib. The threat of the takedown can have a massive effect on how striking operates. But at a certain point, You know, is it worth like putting your head forward in a wrestling stance? Is it worth getting in this really wide position that doesn't allow you to move your feet or transfer weight? At a certain point, you just have to know how to wrestle. Like, that's the solution. Rather than tearing down your entire striking game, at a certain point, once the takedown's initiated, you just have to know how to deal with it. And like, that's the Jose Aldo secret. It's like, I have all the fundamentals that inform both my boxing and my wrestling, and then I'm a really fucking good wrestler. So when it gets to those positions, I have the technique to answer it. And that's basically what happened here with Krylov or with Walker. It was like, he just doesn't have any grappling technique.
Yep.
He's not good at it. That's it.
Pretty much.
All right.
Be better. That's it.
Be better. Yeah. Have an Auto Moicano yell at Johnny Walker.
Don't be a Hadzovic.
Yeah. I was going to say, we needed Hanato to give him a little pep talk backstage after this fight. Like, scream at him to get back in the gym as quickly as he can. Okay, let's take one more break. When we come back, we still have stuff to talk about, folks. Brandon Moreno versus Jussier Formiga, extremely meaningful fight for the flyweight division. Sort of like the apotheosis of Brandon Moreno, his coming of age moment as a contender. Amanda Ribas fought Ronda Marcos, which Ben specifically requested we talk about. There were a lot of grappling sequences in that fight. We might talk about Brasilia versus Yaya and maybe something else as well. I would kind of like to talk about Marina Moroz. There's a lot of good stuff on this card. So we're going to cover as much of it as we can after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Ben Kohn is still here with us, and boy, does he have a shitload more notes to get through. So we have moved on now from the main card. I know people will be clamoring for us to have talked about Trinaldo versus Makdessi. Sorry, folks. All right, please stand back. We're going to have to move on to the prelims. Brandon Moreno versus Jussier Formiga. Amanda Ribas or Hebus, I can't remember, versus Ronda Marcos. Enrique Barzola versus Hani Yahya. Good shit happened on these prelims, specifically in the realm of grappling. So I'm glad we got you here, Ben. Why don't we start with Moreno versus Formiga. First of all, what was your expectation coming in here? Because Phil and I identified this last week as having strong passing of the torch potential, but it was a fight in which either Formiga would have needed to fall off or be ill-prepared, or Moreno would have to come in showing a complete functional game to a degree that he never had before. What did you expect coming in? And if you can pick between them, which of those would you say was the deciding factor in Moreno getting the win?
Well, I mean, I did think that I didn't think Formiga would be able to eat those shots. Unfortunately, fortunately, he was. That's my son making an appearance, and my wife frantically grabbing him.
I'm picturing the whole BBC, children running into the room. I'm now going to be racist by calling it your maid instead of your wife.
That was fantastic.
The real assassin, baby, here to kill the flow of the podcast.
This basically went roughly as I thought it would.
Okay.
I did think, like I said, that Moreno would get a finish, just because I did think that maybe Formiga, after that last knockout, I couldn't trust him to be able to eat clean shots. What I did not think would happen was Moreno almost knocking himself out by running face first into Formiga right in the beginning, which allowed Jussier to lock up that guillotine. But
it's exactly what happened in his fight with Kai Kara-France too. He starts aggressively that he just runs into a big shot. I think that's going to be a pattern going forward. Moreno gets staggered in the first minute of every fight and then just doesn't stop doing what he's doing and wins.
If I would ask Jussier to do one thing, it would be to go watch my Fight Site video with that we did breaking down the Khabib Poirier guillotine attempt, and see why pulling full guard when you have an arm and guillotine is not the way to go, which is weird, giving advice to Jusir Formiga, but still. Actually, everyone should go check that out. But just to highlight some of the issues that people kind of like still seem to have with that arm and guillotine, you're not able to get a full lateral crunch when you do that. When you do the arm in, Moreno defended it perfectly, and this is kind of like the theme of the fight in general, is that Moreno is a really good grappler in his own right, and similarly to Burns, Maia, this is that theme that we're talking about, is that for the most part, Formiga just wasn't able to really put Moreno in danger. He wasn't good enough to control him fully. He was losing on the feet, and he's not a submission threat in snatch submission situations. The one time he did snatch a submission, he couldn't lock up the position he really needed because Moreno is skilled enough and was composed enough to defend it. He did not let Formiga, who was trying to do some of the right things, he wasn't leaning back on the arm and guillotine, which we see every non-skilled grappler do. He did try and kind of compress, but again, he couldn't really get that compression because of the fact that he wasn't full guard. So Moreno was able to keep one leg posted, his knee on his knee. He didn't go fully down, and eventually he was able to just, work his way out.
Is it true that like the secret to a lot of defense on the ground is just patience?
Oh yeah,
like just...
at least before it's fully locked in. Like
Sure.
If you have an armbar that's extended, go immediately. But yeah, and this was the story of a lot of this fight, is that a scramble would be initiated either by usually by Formiga, but sometimes even by Moreno himself, and Moreno would just defend it well enough. At the right time, he would explode. At the right time, he would move, and it worked for him. He was able to escape. He was able to do the damage on the feet. He would even initiate on his own, like I said, at the end of the first round, he was able to get that clinch entry on Formiga, and he didn't use it to try and take him down, didn't use it to try and control him. He landed some really solid strikes. And I think that was kind of the theme for pretty much this entire fight, honestly. Formiga just wasn't able to get to the positions he normally wanted to. Every time he tried to get to the back again on the cage, Moreno would just block his leg from sliding over.
Yeah.
And he did that the whole round. The whole end of the second round was them both against the fence. He's against the cage. He just blocks every single time. Every single time. Every time he tried to pull a leg out, Moreno would reestablish. And that's, I think, something we're going to see a lot of control-oriented grapplers and jiu-jitsu people continue to run into problems with against guys. What were your feelings with how it went on the feet? Did that go roughly how you guys thought as well?
Phil, any thoughts?
I think that Moreno's size was more of a factor than I thought it would be. I didn't realize how much of a big, how much of a big flyweight he is in terms of like his, and
he's getting bigger too. Like he's clearly growing into his frame.
I think he's younger than me.
He's 26.
Yeah.
I want to say.
Yeah, he's 2 years younger than me. He's going to keep getting bigger too.
And yeah, so I think that was wrecking Formiga's distance control a lot more than I thought it was. A lot more than I would have expected it to, because a lot of Moreno's distance closing is just like a big jolting jab, and Formiga he's sort of jab countering specialist. He really seemed profoundly uncomfortable with like how he was going to approach Moreno's jab. Like
I think
Moreno was doing it from kind of too far away for him to duck under and hit takedowns, and so he was like, "Do I have to counter and get in?" And Moreno was doubling up on it. He was kind of, and yeah, so it seemed like there have been, we've seen Moreno get messed up by really dedicated counterpunches in like Pantoja, who just stood his ground and Moreno burst forward and countered the combinations with his own. And we've seen Formiga countering jabs, but like this was a dynamic which I think like the the specific styles of kind of lunging in behind combinations and the the size disparity, or at least reach disparity, it changed that more than I thought it would.
I think another factor here was obviously Pantoja and Formiga, they're very different counter fighters. Pantoja is such a trigger combination counter puncher. It's like the moment you do anything, he just starts swinging back. That's how he counters. Formiga wants that nice shot. He doesn't want to get hit. He doesn't want to put himself at risk. He wants to catch you at the right distance and make it count. And there's logic to both schools. Pantoja ends up in a lot of fucking wars, and Formiga doesn't. I think a factor there was the reach. It was absolutely played a role, but also Moreno threw hardly any straight jabs. Most of them were preceded by weird feints and weird little shifts of position, little movements of the feet. It's something that GSP used to be really, really good at. Was like that half-beat feint that came before the jab. And before I understood why it worked, I used to always be like, how come no one can see the jab coming? He telegraphs it every time. And the thing is, it's GSP. You know the jab's coming. It's a question of, can you time it? Once he knows that you're waiting on it to come, the game becomes less about, do you know what punch I'm going to throw, and more, can you time it well enough to actually answer it? And I thought Moreno did a really good job of just taking Formiga's timing away on the feet. He would sort of shift his head to the left and then step around and throw the jab. It never just came straight from the distance or the position that you would expect. There was always a little something before it that made it difficult to predict. And anticipation is half of counter striking. And Formiga just couldn't anticipate anything.
I do think it's also worth noting that I do think specifically there was one sequence on the ground that made me think that Formiga's athleticism has slipped and speed, because at one point Moreno basically sprawled and missed the sprawl because Formiga just couldn't get up quick enough, and that allowed Formiga to actually get to his back. And the commentators that was so slick, and I'm like, actually, that was the least slick thing ever, and it was just Moreno just going ham on a sprawl, and just Formiga's like, wait, what?
Phil, that's sort of like your Shogun Machida 2 theory, where Shogun accidentally got the more emphatic result by being a worse version of himself.
Yeah.
It was
that stuff still happened super fast though, right? I mean, Formiga up kicked him and was trying to stand up, and then he was trying to reshoot, and then Moreno sprawled into nothing, and then he just jumped on his back. I mean, it looked super cool.
It looked awesome, but that, and that's what I thought at first. I'm like, oh, that was badass. But then I'm like, no, Formiga didn't do anything to make it happen. Moreno just completely sprawled too fast, and Formiga's like, I'm just gonna take his back then. Mm-hmm. And and that's it.
It was him over reading on something. He thought was coming. He was like, he's definitely gonna reshoot on me, and then it's like, no, he's not gonna reshoot. You're gonna sprawl into the mat. But I like playing with expectations like that. I think one of the really nice things we saw doing was Moreno's fake suplexes into punches whenever he got the rear waist lock, and he'd be like, I'm going to pick you up and suplex you, and then he'd be like, no, why would I do that? And he'd just start, and then as soon as Formiga would go to fight grips, he'd just punch him.
He's got a nice rear waist clinch throw game. I don't know how deep it is, but the confidence with which Moreno chases those throws, we've now seen that in several of his last 3 or 4 fights.
Well, it didn't take much for Formiga to shut it down the second time, though. He literally just wrapped the leg.
Right. But that's fine, is that it leads to something else. I mean, there's a parallel / contrast in this fight to Oliveira Lee, what Lee would have needed to do. Now granted, Oliveira was a lot more frustrating when he was on his back, made it more difficult for Lee to get shots off, but there was certainly something to the fact that whenever Moreno ended up on top, he did not hesitate to just start hitting Formiga.
Well, part of the problem with that for Formiga, at least so in the first round, he did attempt the triangle. He did switch to that omoplata. The problem was that when Oliveira was attacking these submissions, he was actually in a position to really threaten with danger compared to Formiga, because Formiga's triangle, when he locked in that triangle, Moreno was standing up and throwing a punch, and he didn't drag him all the way into the guard. He was still Formiga's hips were all the way elevated off the ground. So it wasn't like he was really in danger, and then he switched to omoplata, but the elbow wasn't locked. He didn't have the arm locked.
Yeah.
He was losing the elbow right at the start. So it was kind of like these chain submissions, but none of them were really a threat. And that's what I guess falls back into that theme of, if you're going to be on your back, if your thing is jiu-jitsu and control, you need to have a threat of a submission, and there was none really there. Every time Moreno was in a spot that was disadvantageous, it was Formiga continuously looking for more control rather than trying to threaten with something else that could advance him.
Yeah, very good point. But there was also a broader strategic contrast where, like, Kevin Lee, as Phil, as you very wisely predicted, was essentially, even though Zahabi told him to pressure in the corner, it was still very much like, don't go to the ground with Charles Oliveira. Was the sort of the tone of the fight. And like, I think for Moreno here, we just see like there are some very real advantages in just finding out a way to mold your whole game to the opponent rather than chopping pieces of your game off because it's too dangerous to use those. You know what I mean? Like there was an unbroken flow to everything that Moreno did in this fight. He went for those throws. It didn't matter if Formiga stopped them because his game already accounts for the possibility of not finishing the throw. I think we saw that against Kai Kara-France, or maybe it was Askar Askarov. We saw it in that fight as well, where he started to hit the throw, didn't get it. Doesn't matter. Your back is turned. I'm going to start punching you now while you try to turn around and desperately fight to face me again. He got to do everything he wanted to do. He didn't try to pare down his options. And so even against someone as ostensibly dangerous to grapple with as Formiga, he had respect, but absolutely no concern about playing his normal game with Formiga. It was like he won every round. He looked great.
Some people actually scored this for Formiga, which is odd to me. But
really?
This was honestly 3-0.
Yeah, I don't see that at all.
I think there was one. I think round one was reasonably close because
except that Moreno landed hard shots from the top.
Formiga hit him with the right hand and ended he stunned him slightly at the beginning and ended up in mount. He had mount for a reason.
He did have mount. He had mount briefly, but Moreno was able to actually reestablish a half guard right away.
Yeah.
In the third round, he had the mount for a really long time, but he did absolutely nothing with it.
Right.
Yeah. So,
and on that note, I didn't mind that. I didn't actually mind the quick stand up in round two. It was quicker probably than ideal, but also Formiga got to half guard and he had the crossface, and he appeared to have no intention of advancing or attacking.
Yeah. So what I wanted to say is that we see a lot of people it is vitally important that you believe in your game, whatever it is. Charles Oliveira versus Kevin Lee. Charles Oliveira believes in his own come forward, pressure, submit game.
Right.
Brandon Moreno believed he could go to the floor with Jussier Formiga in the same way that Jack Hermanson believed he could go to the floor with Jacare, and that worked out fine. You can also become your executioner in some ways, because Jussier Formiga, I think when I looked at that fight, I was like, this was the one that felt to me like a flow roll, because it wasn't, it looked like he'd gotten so dialed into the idea of control grappling as being, his game and his place, the way he would win it, is that he would just hold positions for huge amounts of time in fights which weren't decided by massive amounts of damaging offense. It wasn't apart from that one big flurry that Moreno got, it wasn't these weren't fights that rounds that couldn't have been turned around with some ground and pound, or that huge sequence where he just pushed him up against the cage. So if the problem is the deeper people go into an approach, it can also lock them into it.
Yes.
And I think this was also true in Enrique Barzola against Rani Yahya, where I watched that fight and I was like, you know what? I think Rani Yahya could have just won a kickboxing match there. After I'd been watching it for a couple of minutes, I was like, I know you're not going to do this, Rani Yahya, but you could literally just keep kickboxing Enrique Barzola at this point because I've realized that you're actually better at it than he is.
Yeah, Barzola was really good at being big.
Yeah, and super tireless.
He is an insane scrambler. He's so dynamic. He doesn't get tired. He just like we've been saying about a bunch of these fights, like he's just insanely confident that he has a path out of whatever position he ends up in and does not stop working. So yeah, weirdly, like we've seen Hanayaya. The thing is I don't know that how good Hanayaya's stamina is in striking either. I don't think he's that comfortable doing it. And we've seen him try
but if he would have won 2 rounds on the feet and then gassed out in the third anyway.
Sure, because Barzola's, not much of a finishing threat. What was the fight of Yaya's that we saw him try to go like full striking attack?
Simone?
Maybe
Ricky Simone, he did a lot of striking with Simone, no? And then
I think
Joe Soto?
I think he got a ton of takedown stuffed in both those fights, and then just got out-volumed by Super, like in the same way that we really predicted would happen in this fight, and which absolutely happened.
Yeah, although I seem to remember in the Joe Soto fight maybe that he was just like didn't even really seem to try taking it to the ground. He was like, I'm just going to box Joe Soto up, and he got really tired after.
I think it was like this. I thought it was like this one in that he started off. Yeah, he was actually winning the stand-up, and then he just blew his energy on grappling.
Well, he shot 11 takedowns.
Yeah,
on Soto.
Okay, so never mind. I feel like there's a fight I'm thinking of where he didn't appear to try the grappling, but I may also just be inventing.
I remember Maia doing that, but not necessarily so much.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us your quick read on this before we try to cover just one more fight, Ben?
The Yaya Barzola fight is, again, I mean, it really fits into that theme that I was talking about. Yaya just, I think the best way I could put it is like when he goes to that head outside single, it's much easier to get the butt to the ground with that head outside single than it is with the head inside single. And because he can literally dive his entire body weight straight to the ground, right? And it's going to force the guy there. And he's just literally trying anything he can just to be like, stop standing and let's play from here.
Right.
The problem is that there's no real way to advance from there.
Yeah.
Especially if your opponent's bigger, stronger, and a better and a good scrambler in his own right, you're not going to be able to advance from there. So he's wasting a ton of energy trying to hold down a bigger, stronger opponent with, again, no real submission threat. There was never a point in time where Barzola was. I don't think that Yaya attempted a single submission the entire fight.
I don't think so. Yeah, Barzola was not at all shy about letting Yaya get a look at his back for a split second. He's like,
and that's the MMA metagame.
Right.
Like, everybody turns their back. And if you look at, I'm going to bring back another fight, the Safarov versus Adolfo Vieira fight, where Safarov tried to do what every single fighter does. Start to put their hands to the ground, start to stand up against the cage, and Vieira was ready for it. He took advantage of that right away. He was able to basically he was going to threaten the back take and scared the shit out of Safarov, who ended up just turning into mounts. So the metagame is I'm going to be able to scramble up by using the cage to block you from really being able to establish any sort of position and just stand up and work my way back. And Yaya was forced to consistently try to reground a bigger, stronger, more athletic, younger, and tireless opponent. And Yaya doesn't have the gas tank for that. Yeah. He doesn't have the finishing ability to really threaten anything. And that's always going to be a problem for guys like him. So, yeah, would he win the jiu-jitsu match on scoring? Yeah. But that's not a jiu-jitsu match. And we saw that his skills are there. Like, those scrambles are great. The way he constantly came out the back from that single leg position was like almost like a deep half, but going all the way through.
The third round was just like a rinse and repeat that move over and over.
Yeah. And it's a great way to defend yourself from taking punches to the head.
Sure.
So, because he couldn't get hit in the head, but then Barzola was just. I also want to point out Barzola landed like 12 to 6 elbows to the body.
Yes, he did, and a couple to the head that were maybe 11 to 5. But
I don't know what it was, but I was sitting there going, I don't know if you're allowed to do that.
Yep.
Maybe the ref hated Yaya.
Who doesn't? He's such an offensive man. He's got such a
his
bump.
Shorts go past his to the middle of his shins. It's so upsetting.
Hani Yaya in like early 2000s long denim shorts. I just pictured Juggalo Hani Yaya.
He's wearing John Cena's jorts. But unironically.
Okay, so yeah, it was awesome. I think, yeah, in some sense, it was just a style matchup thing, like you said, Ben. Like Yaya, I think that against a lot of opponents, that takedown game just works for him. Like usually, that's all he has to think about. Is I can get this single. Once we get to the ground, it's my world. You're gonna make that desperate move to get out of here. His takedown game is really defined by just a desire to cling to people. Mm-hmm. And that just doesn't play the same way against as confident and competent a scrambler as Barzola. He's just not worried, and so at that point, like you said, you have to be threatening. You have to be forcing. You have to be limiting scrambling options by creating such a threat that you force certain moves that you can stay that mental step ahead of the opponent. And Barzola just didn't really have to worry about anything. I think you're right. I don't recall a single submission attempt from Yaya. I don't think he ever really got a chance. So
yep. The only submission attempt was by Barzola, and it was bad.
Yeah, he tried a straight arm lock, right? The
knee bar, and his knee was not even pointed in the right direction.
Yeah,
I was just looking at it like, well, what are you doing?
You're never gonna.
It didn't matter, but I was just like, what do you really try? What do you think you're gonna accomplish here, man?
He tried both that, and in round 3, he tried to hit the Kimura grip straight arm bar.
Oh yeah,
2 moves that you will never ever finish on Hani Yaya. But hey,
or on anybody above the level of purple belt, but whatever.
Right. But of the 2 guys who were in positions attempting offense, even if it was dumb offense, it was Barzola. Absolutely. He was the one.
Also, for this card, shout outs to the good scoring. Like, this fight, everyone watched it and we were like, it's a draw. And they actually scored it a draw. Like, that Formiga versus, Moreno fight, great. The only bad spot was, of course, ZDS versus Konchenko. But like overall, like this was another card with grappling in and like mixed grappling and striking, where most of the time I was just like, yeah, that was good. Well done, judges.
It almost makes you wonder what the influence of the crowd might be normally. You know, there's clearly very anecdotal. There's not nearly enough repetitions to go off of, but it does make me wonder, like in a completely silent arena, is it in some ways easier to score a fight? Because I agree, it was almost all decisions in this card, and even I thought Dos Santos Konchenko was defensible, was fine. So,
I'm hoping it just like gives him his confidence back, but if it doesn't, and this is what we can expect to see from him,
Yeah, we do. We did. We were talking before the show began about how we have to assume that he had an off night that got him knocked out, and now he is now feeling the way that he made Lyman Good feel in their fight. Where, as Phil and I have mentioned many times in the show, Lyman Good said to his corner, they're like, "What's wrong? What's going on?" And he said, "I don't want to get knocked out." And it's not a good thought to have in your head as a fighter. And Dos Santos, Zaleski did not look like his old self here tonight. Anyway, though, we've got one more to talk about, Ben, that you've got notes on anyway. Amanda Ribas versus Randa Marcos. Both of these women's names are an utter mystery to me, but please take it away.
This was a fight that I really, really enjoyed more than I was expecting to, although I do, Randa Marcos usually has for some fun scrambly fights. Mm-hmm. But what really impressed me with Amanda specifically was that she really, really seemed to learn the right lessons from the exchanges. She really, when she found something that worked, she went back to it consistently. She continued to do what worked, and she found those things really quickly. On the feet, for example, that spinning kick as Rando was circling away worked really well. Mm-hmm. I'm going to keep doing it until it stops working. It didn't, but she kept doing it. But I'll give you a perfect example. There was this particular exchange where she was in half guard and she had the overhook on Randa. And Randa, the first time she did it, she posted her hand, but didn't actually correctly stand up. right? So what you have to do is you get the underhook, and you have to bring yourself lower than your opponent so that you can come out and then work the single to get to either to get up or to work your own takedown. And she didn't. And Amanda was able to bring that post out. She pulled the post away. She did it again. Randa was successful. But what Amanda picked up on was that in that half guard, Randa needs that extra. Like it's not a flow for her where she gets the underhook, she posts, and she's getting low to come out. It's a step-by-step process for her. So she was able to kind of nip it in the bud, and that's why she was able to do a ton of damage from half guard.
Yeah.
With those elbows. She also made a really good use of frames, which stopped Randa in her tracks. So she would use the frame to get Randa to freeze and then start landing elbows. And everything that I really enjoyed watching about this fight was her learning the right lessons from what she was doing rather than just doing other things. Like she was perfectly comfortable sitting in half guard with Randa having an underhook, which is traditionally a bad position, because she understood I don't need to stop doing this or stop this from happening because I know I can do damage from this position. And if it stopped working, I imagine Amanda would have been like, it's no longer working. Work for something else.
Yeah. Now you have to treat that underhook the way that you're, quote unquote, supposed to. That it was interesting that the overhook she countered that with, that whizzer, it was sort of a frame. I think that, like you said, it was a step-by-step process. I think that's a good point. But the way she was able to lock down, she used Marcos's underhook against her. I'm essentially like locking your arm out now. You're paused. I've caught you in this little moment between positions, and did not hesitate to take advantage of that. You got a moment of control. You beat the shit out of the person who's no longer moving, and what made me. Sorry, go ahead. No, please.
One, it's a particular position I use in jiu-jitsu a lot, actually. So the overhook, when people get that underhook, I actually really don't mind when people get it because I have a set of moves and how I respond. Unless the guy's just much better, then I'm able to use it. But what made me realize how intelligently Amanda was fighting was she had her knee already like halfway through a knee slide. She was already on her way to side control and made the conscious choices to continue to stay in side control, but also in a way that pins Randa's hips.
Yeah.
So she went halfway through that knee slide, pinned the knee, and pinned that leg with her knee, and that's what she was using with that overhook as well, and just absolutely just kept elbowing the shit out of Randa.
It's the kind of shit we used to see a lot from Anderson Silva's ground and pound would be like in these sort of like quarter guard positions or like halfway through a knee slide. You just now your shin is a pin. Just leave it there and go to work with your hands. She's really good at keeping her hips elevated as well when trying to when establishing those positional controls. She did some really good shoulder pressure stuff against Randa, and even when Randa got her down in that third round, what she tried to do the Jose Aldo thing, where keeps turning from side to side to get the hip rotation and try to stand up, but she couldn't do it. So then she's just like, okay, I'm going to now roll with the momentum. Rolls into that arm bar, which wasn't fantastic, but she was able to use the threat of her arm bar and then a triangle, and she was able to again push off Marcos. It's just she really, really was good at creating these situations and always making the right call. She's a progressive, methodical fighter.
Exactly.
One move informs the next.
Really big because women's strawweight, while it is the deepest of the divisions, there's still, I think, a lot of room for growth. And to have someone who's a really good athlete, seems to really care about doing well and learning and growing in all phases while also making the right calls in cage and seeming to have the right game plans as well. I'm really excited for her future. I mean, I don't know what's next for her, but I really am excited to see it.
All right. Well, that is pretty much more than all the time we have to cover UFC Brasilia. Ben, I know you got to run. So just before we wrap up, can you tell the people listening where they can find your insightful analysis?
I work with thefightsite.com. We actually just dropped my interview with Zach Makovsky. You could check it out on thefightsite.com. You can follow me on Twitter at AncientBen10. If you like beef jerky, feel free to feel free to purchase. Just message me on Twitter. I talk about it a lot. My profile is my cow, which is the logo. And follow the Fight Site. The guys are amazing. If you think I'm good, they're better. I promise you that. Support us on the Patreon. I have my own podcast, MM Angst Podcast. It is not as good as this one, but we do have a Mexican physicist and a South African Muslim engineer. So,
I mean, it sounds better.
It's almost as diverse as our show. Is what you're saying.
Almost as diverse as this show, yes. And I cannot thank you guys enough for having me on. I've loved your show forever. You guys know that.
Thanks.
So
man. Yeah, we really appreciate having you on. I mean, obviously, we got to have you back because this was great.
I would love it. Absolutely.
But of course, you and Tom Elliott are going to have to battle to the death to determine which one of you does get to come back.
Yeah, it was really nice being on here this one time, and I really appreciate it.
I say you make a deliberately bad batch of jerky, feed it to Tom, and then you grapple with him.
Sneaky.
Yeah.
Are you sure you're not Jewish? That was really sneaky.
Whoa! All right. I'm not allowed to laugh at that. You're allowed to say it, but
it's okay. I'm here. You're fine.
You're allowed to say it, but I can't enjoy it, or the show will be shut down. Okay, Phil. Anything coming out? I know that normally there'd be a preview for this upcoming card. I was very excited for Woodley Edwards, but at this point, we have to assume it's not happening. At least not in any.
I might be doing a preview for Barge Fights, whatever it ends up being. But as of now, let's just say probably not.
Yeah, the UFC is scrambling to fill that card up with short notice replacements and all kinds of shit. But if that happens, anything we would have to say previewing it would be useless. We don't know what most of the matchups are. And besides that, I don't know that it'll be happening at all. However much hubris Dana White thinks he can club this pandemic over the head with, I just don't know that it's going to happen. It's not feasible, nor is it good or safe. So I'm grateful that we got one great last card. I was so worried about having the football pulled out before I got to kick it, and I got to kick it, and I enjoyed it. It was great. Now let's take a vacation from UFC. We'll be back next week. Do not worry. Heavy Hands will continue. There are so many topics. There are so many classic fights and great fighters that we could discuss. We will almost certainly be bringing on more of the Ben's compatriots from the Fight Site and other guest analysts to discuss those topics with us. So make sure you come back for next week's episode. Keep your eyes peeled to the Heavy Hands Patreon. It's $3 a month to get you access to all our bonus episodes. And I'm going to try to put up some boxing commentaries and things like that on there, just to help you guys, to keep us all occupied while we're doing our civic duty and trying to stay indoors. So thank you again to Ben. Find him on Twitter at, is it Agent Ben 10?
Agent Ben 10, yeah.
At Agent Ben 10. You can find Phil on Twitter at Evil Greg Jackson and myself at Boxing Bush. You can find Ben's work, as he said, on the fight-site.com. You can find Phil and I's writing on bloodyelbow.com. And once again, come back to us next week. We will continue talking about the fightings. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.
Thanks. I really appreciate it.
See ya. We'll do it again sometime, for sure.
Please. Awesome. Thanks.
All right, Phil. So we're deleting all of that, right? Okay.
Yep. It's done.
All right. You ready to start breaking down UFC Brasilia?
Yeah. There was some grapply, scrambly stuff, and there wasn't enough punching. Not enough punching, and it all went to decision.
Yeah, it sucked.